All right, I think we're ready to start. Welcome everyone to this event on the international anti-liberal right versus Barnevernet. Barnevernet being the Norwegian Child Protection System. This roundtable will present some of the preliminary findings from the DIPA LawTransform project Legitimacy Challenges. And unlike the panel that was before us, we are early stage in this project. And the project aims to map the organization and strategies applied by opponents and proponents in the debates about children's rights, family values, and child protection. Analyze the discourses within these topics, and examine and compare citizens' opinions about children's rights, family values, and child protection. So, some of the opponents that we have identified are organizations that are operating across Europe, and you will hear about some of them today. My name is Mathea Loen. I'm a PhD candidate at the Center on Law and Social Transformation and Center for Research on Discretion and Paternalism, and on this project. And I'm the moderator on this event, which is also co-hosted by the Center for Research on Discretion and Paternalism at the University of Bergen, Department of Government. So now I'm delighted to introduce the panel. Firstly, we will have an introduction by Neil Datta. Neil has a master's degree in European Public Administration from the College of Europe and a Bachelor of Arts in History and Languages from the State University of New York at Binghamton. In the year 2000, he founded the European Parliamentary Forum for Sexual and Reproductive Rights, and he has been the secretary since 2004. The European Parliamentary Forum is a network of members of parliamentarians from across Europe who are committed to protecting sexual and reproductive health among the world's most vulnerable people. Neil has also recently published some really interesting reports on conservative and religious movements, namely Restoring the Natural Order, Modern Day Crusaders in Europe, and Tip of the Iceberg, Religious Extremists, Funders Against Human Rights for Sexual and Reproductive Health in Europe. So after Neil's introduction, we will hear some comments from Elaine Sutherland and Marit Skivenes. Elaine is a professor too at the Center for Research on Discretion and Paternalism and a professor at the University of Stirling in Scotland. Elaine is an internationally renowned expert on child and family law, as the author of well over 100 articles, book chapters, and books. She founded in 2012, she founded the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of the Child Implementing Project, which seeks to explore implementation of the CRC in the international and comparative contexts. And Professor Sutherland has been a member of the Family Law Committee of the Law Society of Scotland for over 35 years, and in 2019 was appointed by the Scottish Law Commission to its advisory group on cohabitation. Marit Skivenes is professor at the Department of Government, research director and principal investigator at the Center for Research on Discretion and Paternalism. She's recognized as a leading expert in the field of child protection systems with numerous publications in well-regarded journals. She's also a popular lecturer, both nationally and abroad, as well as a widely used commentator by the media. Her primary research interests center around child welfare issues, decision-making, and deliberative processes within different levels of child protection. And she's currently heading the Commission for the official Norwegian report on improved quality and legal protection in child protection. All right, so Neil, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'll stand up. Okay. Okay, is this on? Yep, okay, great. So thank you very much, Mathea. And also thank you Marit, thank you Sidi for inviting me to be here with you in Bergen again. So maybe just to preface a few things in relation to what I'll be presenting to you. We started like over a year ago, a project on entitled Legitimacy Challenges, which takes a look at the different challenges in contestation which center around the Norwegian and more broadly the Nordic systems of child protection services. Now, myself, I am not at all an expert in children's rights or child protection services. We will hear the experts on that afterwards. But the reason I was brought into this subject is that the contestation around this, and this has taken on it's become quite big in Norway and in other countries. The reason I was taken on board on this project is that when we take a look at some of the contestation around the Norwegian cases, we find some of the same actors who are involved in the well-known contestation around abortion, sexual reproductive health and rights, and LGBT rights, which is my area of expertise. And so as Mattea mentioned, I've written a few reports on this subject, and while my job is advancing sexual and reproductive health and rights, over the past 10 years, I've developed this weird hobby where I spend my free time looking and tracking the far-right, alt-right, and specifically the anti-gender actors. So I know who they are, what they're active on, and it was a surprise to me also that they were also active on children's rights. And so this whole exercise is to see whether children's rights is in fact a new front or a front in these wars around gender ideology. Okay, so let's see if I got this right. All right. So first, in terms of gender ideology and what I will call anti-gender actors. So I'm not too sure if everyone is familiar with that, but by anti-gender actors, I mean those actors mainly within civil society, but also within politics, who are active and who are activists against issues related to abortion, LGBT rights, sexual and reproductive health and rights, and now more recently, even just anything with the word gender in it, such as gender-based violence. Now, and the concept of anti-gender connotes the new innovations within this movement, in that they have become more professionalized, more institutionalized, and more active over the past 10, 15 years. There's a whole body of scholarly literature on that, but that's the group of organizations I'm taking a look at. And now we know that these anti-gender actors have been very active around sexual reproductive health and rights and LGBT rights, and that's been well known and well researched. But we've seen that the area of children's rights has become more contested, and specifically that area around child protective services, and specifically the models in Nordic countries. And as I mentioned, we saw some of these same actors appearing there. And so is this something new for them, or is it simply anecdotal that they were there? So first, so we decided to take a look at how these anti-gender actors are really investing in the area of children. Now, first of all, these actors have always been involved in some aspect of children's rights. So, for example, the anti-abortion rights, the anti-abortion actors, they're always concerned about the unborn. Okay, so that's one area of children that they were involved in. They were also involved in contesting comprehensive sexuality education. We find this in Europe, Latin America, Africa, United States, everywhere. We see that this is a common thread in terms of what they do. Also, other areas such as limiting access to abortion for minors and a whole range of other areas. So that's quite well documented in terms of what they do, but we weren't too sure if they were also getting involved in child protection services. And usually the argument that they used in a lot of their different mobilization on children's rights was using children as a narrative tool to block certain progress on certain social issues. So that, for example, in France, when there was the equal marriage bill before Parliament in 2013, many French people did not say, oh no, I'm against gay rights or anything like this. They would say, no, 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 I'm in favor of the gays. I'm just thinking about the children. You know, what will happen to the children with all of this? And there you have this one group from Colombia, Sentido, who explained all of this, the manufacturing moral panic about how to instrumentalize the concerns of children in relation to certain social progress. The way that I like to see it is it's a bit like the catchphrase from this one character in The Simpsons. If you remember the wife of Reverend Lovejoy, her catchphrase was always, oh, will someone please think of the children? So it's a bit that line of argument that's been used by many anti-gender actors. So then, if we take a look at children's rights from the perspective of the contestation and specifically litigation around Norwegian Child Protective Services, what we realized that we had some challenges accessing certain primary documentation such as amicus briefs, etc. So I decided to go around the other way, which is to take a look at the known anti-gender actors active in Europe, and then to see to which extent are they or are they not active on these cases. And so first I took a look at, I'm going to look a bit here because I can't see the little screen in front of me. So first I took a look at the anti-gender actors and who is active on these issues. So as I said, most of them are active on children's rights in some way. And they're active, in the ways I've already discussed. But then within that group, and there are about over 100, 120 of them in the whole European continent, which ones have the specific skill set and expertise to get involved in litigation? And that's a very smaller number of organizations. And then when we take a look at that, we can boil it down to 4 main organizations: Alliance Defending Freedom, Citizen Go, European Center for Law and Justice, and then Ordo Iuris. So I'll take a look a little bit more into these 4 organizations and what are they doing. So one thing that we see, and again, this is very preliminary, one of the specific issues that they home in on is homeschooling. And some of the arguments that they use, and we can almost see a certain hierarchy, is that first they will assert parental rights. It's the right of a parent to determine the education, the upbringing of a child. Sometimes that doesn't work, and then they come in with an extra layer of arguments, which is that of religious freedom. So it's the religious freedom of the parents to raise their child in a certain way. And then there's another layer of argument which comes in that of limiting the state's capacity to intervene within the sacred institution of the family, that the state should have very limited scope in this area. And so we can see how this then concentrates on the Nordic model, which is perhaps more interventionist in its approach than many other child protective service models. Then if we take a look at specifically some of these organizations and what are they doing, Alliance Defending Freedom, that's a big organization headquartered in the US, but with several offices throughout Europe. They were engaged before the European Court of Human Rights, and specifically in one case in Germany, the Wunderlich case, which was specifically about homeschooling, keeping in mind that homeschooling is not really allowed in fact, most European countries. Then we have Citizen Go. I think our friends from Latin America may be familiar with that one, headquartered in Madrid. They are the cheerleaders of this group. So they don't engage in litigation, but what they do is that they are able to identify specific cases, probably with their friends who are doing the litigation, and then they're the ones that organize online social media campaigns about this poor family, this poor Polish family who's in Norway and is being harassed by the Norwegian Child Protection Services, and they organize big campaigns, and they have millions of people to support them and sign the petitions, and by the way, also do fundraising off of that. But so they're the cheerleaders behind this. And then you have this one group in France, the European Center for Law and Justice, again with American links, the American Center for Law and Justice, and they're getting involved in homeschooling parental rights as well, mainly in the French context. But the one who has been the most involved in this is a Polish organization called Ordo Iuris, which we've been able to identify over 100 engagements on different aspects of children and child protection services. And as you can see here, I hope by now you'll all recognize the Norwegian flag, that they are specifically involved in cases around the Norwegian Child Protection Services, and so that it was even this Ordo Iuris, a legal organization, which is part of a wider pseudo-Catholic religious political network called Tradition, Family and Property. They were the ones who acted as legal counsel to a Norwegian family who obtained asylum in Poland because they were being harassed by the Norwegian Child Protection Services. And you can then see they have a number of ongoing campaigns, which are media campaigns and equally legal campaigns on specifically the Norwegian Child Protection Services. But then if we then zoom back out and we take a look at who are some of the other actors involved in these types of mobilization around children's rights, who also share the same anti-gender perspective, we can find that there's a whole range of other actors also, which are overlapping, but sometimes also distinct from the traditional anti-gender actors. So with the anti-gender actors, we know that they'll approach the issue from the perspective of life, family, and freedom, but then there's related actors, sometimes overlapping, in other areas, so that the transgender arguments and those actors against trans rights also appear as significant actors there, specifically in the perspective of parental rights. We have also fathers' rights groups, which have emerged in a certain number of countries, particularly strong in Germany, Austria, Italy, who there want to modify or change laws related to custody and divorce. Then you have some of the bigger macro actors there. Norway, the Nordic Child Protection Service model is a specific feature, interestingly, of Russian disinformation. So they say that Norway will take children away from nice, healthy Christian families and will place them with pedophile homosexuals. So that's one of the things that comes out of out of Russian propaganda. And the Nordic model of child protection services is a whole subcategory of distinct Russian propaganda aimed at Western Europe. You then have also ultra-nationalists such as Viktor Orban from Hungary, who would associate having more children within the certain family with the positive aspect of demographic growth and having more Hungarian babies and children. And then you also have a certain, with a more economic approach, that the neoliberals and hyper-capitalists, which would therefore align themselves on these issues related to child protection services from the perspective of having a very limited government and a small state and non-interference into the private space of the family. So we have to take into account these actors as well in understanding the contestation around that. And I'll end here. This will be the last slide. Other areas to explore. So bearing in mind that we are at the very beginning of this exploration of contestation around the children's rights in the Norway case, the positioning of these anti-gender actors on the many cases of church sex abuse or church institutional abuse. There have been cases of church sex abuse affecting children in almost every country in the world. What we see is that those who tend to defend the church, whether it's Catholic or another type of church, those who defend the church tend to be the ones who are also active in the mobilization around or against children's rights in favor of parental rights or other issues. So I think that's an interesting area to explore. Often they will use the narrative that we are being Christianophobic by highlighting the cases of abuse within the church, and that we shouldn't be highlighting these at all. Another one is to see how these groups position themselves on corporal punishment. A number of these groups are therefore quite in favor of some forms of corporal punishment and are public about this and advocate for the right for parents to discipline their children with corporal punishment. Another one is trans rights, which has become a very big issue in certain countries in the UK, Spain. It's coming up also in Nordic countries. And then finally, to end up with an analysis of the arguments that many of these groups use, specifically parental rights, religious freedom, and others to be determined. So this is where we are at the very beginning stages of this exploration, and maybe in a year or two, we'll be able to present a book the way that the previous panel just did. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Neil. This is so interesting and also frightening. So now we will hear some comments, first from Elaine and then Marit.
Right, well,
hang on, yeah.
What's it they say about never appearing on stage with children or animals? I would add to that technology, but this is working rather well so far. Well, good morning, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak here. I think in this morning session so far, a very clear theme that's come through is whose rights are respected in liberal democracies or states that would claim to be that. And if ever there was a group whose rights have far too often been ignored, it's the rights of children. Who, of course, it's familiar ground. They're least able to protect their own rights, and therefore it falls to someone else to do it for them or to help them promote their rights. The most obvious candidate is their parent, will be their parents or other caretakers. And the difficulty arises where that person, the parent or caretaker, is the source of the problem. Either they're not supporting children's rights, they're not fulfilling the children's needs, or they're actually posing a threat to the child. And that is where the state comes in with its obligation in terms of child protection. Now, while the European Convention on Human Rights started life as a very adult document, it's long since been accepted by the European Court that child protection is a legitimate function of the state. It's part of the things that the state does. More recently, we've had the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which sets out in an awful lot more detail and much more explicitly the child protection obligation. One of the things we're doing as part of this project is drilling down a little bit further into both the European Convention as interpreted by the European Court and the UN Convention as interpreted by the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, to try to answer the question, is the message being sent from these human rights bodies consistent, or is there something significantly different within all of that? Because one way or another, testing the legitimacy of state intervention in the name of child protection is to measure it against human rights standards. And so our question is, are the human rights standards as articulated by the European Court the same as those that are being articulated by the UN Committee? UN Committee has a lot of other and very different kinds of sources, most notably its general comments, its concluding observations on individual state reports, and most recently, where it applies, the cases under the optional protocol, which gives the UN Committee the opportunity to actually make case-specific determinations. And so what we're doing is we're looking at those different sources. And there are other human rights sources, but those are the primary ones that we're looking at to try and answer the questions about, well, what rights of the child are being promoted in each of these settings, and how are rights balanced, the child's rights, perhaps the child's own conflicting rights, or the child's rights when set against somebody else's rights, the rights of the parents, the rights of foster carers, possibly the rights of other children in the family or involved in the case. And as a result of that exploration, and I'm not going to hazard an answer at this stage, what we're finding a lot of interesting material, and one day in a year or two's time, we'll be able to tell you a little bit more about those findings. Another point I wanted to sort of emphasize is, given the plethora of cases against Norway, obviously this issue is of particular importance here. But I think people from other jurisdictions should be very alert to the fact that it matters for them too. First of all, whatever is happening in respect of Norway could happen just as easily in respect of other jurisdictions. The Norwegian child protection system is not radically different to the system operating in many other jurisdictions, at least with which I'm familiar. So it isn't simply a Norway issue, it's an issue that affects us all. And that sort of brings me back round to some of what Neil was saying. There's a sense in which children's rights and children's interests are something of a trump card. If you say you're taking action to protect children in children's interests, then you almost enter the debate with a sense of moral legitimacy. It's a good thing to look after children. We all kind of feel that. But if those very rights and interests are being hijacked by groups with very different agendas, the kind of groups that Neil was talking about, then I think children's rights themselves are under threat. So far from being simply a Norway-only issue, this is something very much bigger. And we look forward to telling you just how big it is in the fullness of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. I'm going to give you the word to Marit now. I just wanted to chime in with, so you say that this is something that it doesn't only concern Norway, it concerns other countries as well, and they might as well be targeted, but they're not to the same extent as Norway. Not yet. So yeah, okay, Marit.
Thank you, Mattea, and thank you, Neil and Elaine. Excellent and a very good start. So I will try just to point to some of the issues that we might discuss, and some of you might have questions to it. So please feel free. So just kind of chiming in, I think that you're perfectly correct, Elaine. I think that Norway is a case. The court has made some decisions, and this is going to influence how the right of the parents and how the rights of the child is going to be interpreted in other jurisdictions. So I think that's an important kind of pointer. And that's also a reason why we chose to have Norway as an example, because we do know that there's been a heavily criticism of the Norwegian Child Protection System internationally, but also within the country, of course, which is just very normal. Every country, England, the US, Estonia, Sweden, have internal criticism of the child protection system. And one reason for that is because it is so difficult. There are so complex issues. You have the parental rights and you have the children's rights, and here you have to actually put them up against each other, which is just immensely hurtful and difficult. And as you point out then, Neil, this is about the privacy of the family. And naturally, you shouldn't have the state in the family. You should have it as a private sphere. And then you have the parental rights. Well, they are the parental rights. And very often you think of children as the property of the parents. So children are the property of the family and of the parents. So that is exactly what they are arguing. The anti-gender and the activists, they are saying, well, leave the family alone and let the parents decide. And also, as was pointed out in the previous discussions, when we look at the how should I pronounce it, Elaine? Patriarchy.
Patriarchy.
Thank you, patriarchy. When you look at them, it's of course also clear dimension there, who is going to decide and who is going to be the authority within the family. So I think that this is very well connected and also gives a very good case for the discussions on what's going on in some parts of Europe, but also in the US and in other parts of the world. So that is one reason why we chose this. Also, I think that the Nordic countries are a really good example because we have universal services, and it follows that is a generous and comprehensive set of universal welfare services. So that follows that we have a large public sector. And when you have a large public sector, you have a huge involvement of the state. So we have the state all over the place in a way. Early on, from the child is born with the health system, and then you have daycare, and then you have kind of the nurses. Not that it's not present in many other countries as well, but it's just a lot of it. So that is also, of course, a very good case then to see, okay, why not just target the Nordic countries? Because that's a lot of state activities going on there. So that is kind of, I think, two important reasons for choosing Norway and choosing child protection and choosing the Nordic countries. Then when we are in this area, I think it's also very important to underscore that it's a very complex area. I mean, just trying to dig out information, to have kind of a good understanding of what's going on, things are connected. So there is not only that this is a child protection issue or a children-parent issue, but it is also about the families and all the other things that Neil has shown us. It is also a range of actors that don't necessarily want to speak up in the public. It's not easy, and I think Neil will come back to that. It's not necessarily easy to get information about how these organizations and how these actors are funded and what are the drivers behind it. And if you ask to get access to them, they will say, no, thank you, or they will just kind of direct you to some communication responsible that will just give you some very kind of headings on children's rights and parents' rights and family rights. So that is one part of it. And also we lack a lot of kind of data, as I point out, but also we don't have good systematic knowledge about it. So I think my final point before I open up for kind of the more discussion, which is perhaps obvious for many of you, but children are missing in this map. So although we are always or often are promoting children's rights, and that is kind of what about the children, they are not a part of this. Not they themselves and not their representatives, and very, very rarely their organizations. And that also counts for European Court of Human Rights. So they don't themselves have the authority and the opportunity to go to the court and ask the court to decide on their interests. So they are only a part of the parents when these cases are treated. So I think that's also an important matter to bring into the equation here. This is a huge group. We have 2.4 billion children in the world, and they are not a part of this discussion and these types of mobilizations. So I will stop there, Mattea, and give it back to you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so we're gonna open up for comments and questions in the audience now, and then you just have to go around here, and there's a microphone that's lying around. And whilst we are waiting for people to think about questions, I just wanted to go back to something, Neil, you mentioned that when you were finding, or when you were mapping these actors, you said that your starting point was what are the known anti-gender actors? And then, so I'm thinking, but what about the unknown? You know, what about the ones that we don't know, and how do we find them, and what are the other actors? Because now you know you have 4 organizations there that you mentioned, but there are more. So do you want to talk a little bit about who they are, or where the criticism comes from, other than these 4 organizations that we've heard about? Yep.
Oh, I'm sorry. Keep that.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so thank you, Mattea, for the question. First, before going to the question, I just thought it would be useful to preface this by maybe a small clarification, because it just dawned on me by the way that we presented it today, with me going first and then you ending with an overall explanation of the situation. It may make it seem as if the reason for the contestation of the Norwegian Child Protection Services is the anti-gender organizations. That's not at all the case. There's contestation of the Norwegian Barnevernet that takes place anyway. But this contestation provides a useful opening for activism by the anti-gender actors. And that's the way we should see it. So there's not a causal relationship between them instigating this contestation. It's happening in any case, but it's really useful for them to put forward some of their arguments and hopefully score some wins in terms of the discourses that they would like to see, and hopefully have the courts legitimate some of their points of view. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. In terms of the the anti-gender landscape in Europe, it's a bit of an artificial definition as to what is known and what isn't. But I mean, we have to have a starting point. The way it's organized in Europe is that there are national level organizations in just about every country. These are usually the anti-abortion organizations. That's the starting point. So you have, for example, in Italy, Movimento per la Vita, and you have similar organizations in Pro Vita Sweden and things like this. Then there will be another layer of, so they are the pro-life anti-abortion organizations. There will be a newer generation of organizations called, which describe themselves as pro-family. Those tend to be the homophobic ones who are against equal marriage. And then you have certain specialties, specialists that have emerged. Some of them are legal think tanks or lawyer groups that have emerged in some countries. Ordo Juris that I mentioned in Poland is one. You also have Abogados Cristianos in Spain, Christian lawyers. And so with that, we can delineate a fairly clear civil society landscape of who they are. And we can cross-check this by the fact that they organize their own meetings. And so if you are able to see who's at the meetings, then you can have an idea of what the community is. So that's something we can determine. But then again, there's never a fixed border around this. And as to the unknown ones, that's an interesting one. It's, for example, there's a whole aspect of Russian disinformation there. Who is behind this, except that there's state associated actors based somewhere in the Russian Federation. Why are they doing this? There's different reasons for this, but that remains a bit of a mystery. And then how it's then taken up into Western Europe is another area to explore. And then finally, just keeping in mind that the anti-gender actors are a very fluid group, so that new coalitions emerge. If they work, they will last. If they don't work, they disappear, and then something new will be attempted. So it's so I think understanding the fluidity of this movement, of this landscape is an important aspect.
Yeah, thank you. Do you, Marit or Elaine, want to add something to that?
No, I can add it just a tiny bit, because I think just to pick up from Neil, when we speak with service user in Norway and with protest organizations in Norway, we can see that they are well connected with these international organizations. So they will have then either been assisted with, or they are able to get information from, for example, Ordo Juris, or they will have also funding from some of the international organizations that not necessarily are concerned with child protection per se, but they seem to be using this as an opportunity. So I think that is also a part of this. Kind of, it's not visible in a sense, and again, it's not always easy to get access to service users and these protest organizations, neither in the local area, even though we are well known of them. So, but that is also a fact of it. Yeah.
Thank you, Marit. Okay, so we have some questions from the audience. Yeah, go on. Thank you. Let me just put it down on the floor. So, Elaine?
Thanks for that contribution, a very wide-ranging one, and really highlighting a lot of the problems with children's rights. One thing to clarify, when I talked about children generally not being well placed to pursue their own rights, that's not universally so, and it's very much a message from the UN committee that it's up to legal systems and the state to try and ensure that children do have a voice in the process, children as individuals and children through organizations. So children should not be silent in this process. And I think the increasing trend when we look domestically at improving our child protection systems, I'm sure Marek can speak about Norway. I know we're working on it in Scotland, which is my primary jurisdiction. And groups of children are being involved in that. They've been heavily involved right from when is there a need for intervention, right through once a child is in state care, what are the rights that need to be respected? How can things be done better? and what remedies should the child have when the rights are not respected. So children are not just silent partners, or at least the thinking is they shouldn't be. Nonetheless, we come back to the issue that where an individual child is being abused or neglected in the home, then the bottom line is, who does it fall to protect that child? I wonder if the state is the answer, because who else is there? There really isn't any other agency out there. And even if you had independent agencies of child protection, and these have been tried in various jurisdictions, they're likely to be funded by the state. It's the only way that they're going to have enough resources to do a comprehensive job. And of course, you can build firewalls between funding and the organization. But I think the answer is there is no one else if the parents and caretakers are not doing it. We can't leave it to chance. But you're quite right that all the flaws in state action, in who gets the best resources, who gets most attention, are a part of that system.
I'd just like to add on what Elena's just said. When you're saying that, you know, if it's not the state, who else? There's no one else that could do this. If I put myself in the position of one of these anti-gender actors, I would disagree with you, because there's another set of actors that we could call upon to step in, and these are religious institutions. Okay, if it doesn't work in the family, and we don't want the state, or the state doesn't function well, but more likely we don't believe that the state should be involved in this, then the one actor that's left are religious institutions, and they can be funded by the state, but they will be autonomous, they will be independent, they'll run according to their religious ethos, they'll take care of the child, and on top of that, imagine they have the benefit that they'll raise the child right with good Christian or whatever values, and it's not that far-fetched. This was the system up until relatively recently. And I would say that this is probably what many of them would like to go back to, is to re-privatize this aspect of what is now the state's role.
I think Neil just did a great job of playing devil's advocate there. Very possibly these religious organizations would love to re-establish the role, which, as he said, they had in many countries in the past. And in many of those countries, there are or recently have been commissions looking at historical child abuse. And I have to say, in an awful lot of them, the religious organizations did not come out well. They did not address problems with the way they were delivering care. And even if one accepts it was a small minority of cases that they were dealing with where the abuse was going on, they didn't address it. They sought to cover it up. They were not being transparent about it. I would be very reluctant to hand over something as important as child protection to private agencies that would have a financial interest in protecting their own reputation. It's a recipe for disaster, I think. But please, is there anyone wanting to join in that debate and perhaps advance a different point of view?
Yeah, so a comment from Marit, and then
Yes, thank you, and thank you, very good from Elaine and Neil, as usual. But I just wanted to address the point of trust. How can we trust the state? Of course, this is different across countries, across the globe. But I think that we have, of course, the health very ordinary kind of that we have due process, we have the proceedings that we adhere to, transparency, accountability. So there is a lot of mechanisms in place, and we do also have some knowledge about how different system will work according to those standards. So that is, I think that at least that's some way we know something about how we can trust proceedings and a system. Thank you.
yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so we have two questions here. Maybe we can collect both questions and then, yeah.
Hi, Thank you so much. So I'm from Brazil, and my background on the subject is from Brazil, which is completely different world when we think of the organization of the protective system and the state capability of actually providing things comparing to here. But one thing, and this was what really my research, honestly, was the fact that in Brazil, at least legally speaking, you don't have a clear definition of what is a child and what is a child really capable of doing or not. So we have many different legal codes that have different ages determination, and they do not really say, so for example, child marriage into the beginning of 2019, which is like so close, there are exceptions for kids to get married, and this was legally acceptable. So what I start researching, and in Brazil this has been a topic of conversation, is we need to clarify more specifically the concepts we are using. So what we consider as kids and teens, is there a difference? A lot of people talk about gender difference. Oh, girls mature earlier than boys. Should that be taken into consideration when we're making decisions? And also, I think this is also very brought up when we talk about, like, in Brazil, this happens a lot. So Black kids and poor kids are deemed as they mature earlier than rich white kids because of privilege, and so they are treated differently by the system. And also, like, girls and boys are allowed to do different things, especially in regards to sexuality, from an earlier age. And I do think we see these processes and we see these institutions in Brazil, most of them relate to some specific evangelical churches that use this lack of clarity to define what they think is the right child, the right girl, and what she should and should not do, and therefore what the state should and should not allow her to do and protect her from. So, for example, our current human rights minister, the only policy that she had in regard to child pregnancy, which is a huge problem in Brazil, is a campaign of kids have to wait. And that was pretty much it. There was no, like, distribution of contraceptive methods. There's no sex education in school because there's a huge taboo. Because there's this idea of girls should not have sex until they're 18. The churches enforce that a lot. Therefore, problems over. So I said a lot of things, I'm sorry, but the idea is, considering that you guys are using the UN reference and also the European reference, how to deal with these different conceptions of kids, or to different cultural aspects of childhood, considering that these courts are pretty much applying the same references to everywhere. And I think this was brought a lot yesterday in the workshop of, like, people from different countries that come here, how they're going to be judged on the same references, considering their cultures are so different. And we're not talking about abuse, of course, but it's more of like a different way of dealing with things, like kids sleeping in the same bedroom with their parents. I know this has been, oh my God. And in some cultures, that's very, very usual. So this is, sorry, I said a lot of things, but this is what I wanted to know about. Thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, we'll take another question.
Thank you. I was just recently at a conference, and a professor on one of the panels shared that a friend of hers had shared with her that one day she had noticed that all of the regulars outside of a abortion clinic who were there to protest abortions were not there. And she wondered where they were. And she went home and she turned on the TV. And she saw some of their faces on TV because they were a part of the group that had attacked the Capitol, the United States Capitol, on January 6th, 2021. So to your point about the intersectionality is really fascinating. And it really resonated with me, at least in America, where it is true that you see a lot of the same actors in a lot of these spaces that are very pro-parental rights, and also that overlaps with pro-church autonomy, and also very much against child protection services and sort of the general sort of framework of children's rights and children in this context. I also am wondering whether it's a little bit more nuanced than that. And I do think that, at least in my experience, there are those on the left who are in favor of parental rights, who are critical of and suspicious of child protection agencies and what they're doing. I worked for many years, not that many actually in the large scheme of things, but for several years, it felt like many years to me, at a major law firm in New York City that has been really at the helm of a lot of progressive litigation. Our law firm argued Windsor, which was the precursor to Obergefell, which allows same-sex marriage in America, for example. And I can't tell you how often I would receive an email from the pro bono coordinator asking if anybody wants to jump on a case involving New York City or New York State with respect to their child being taken away from them by the Children Protection Services. So I don't know that people on the left are necessarily so disaligned with those on the right when it comes to parental rights. And I'll give you one other quick example, which I think is really exploding, at least in America right now, which is public schools, and specifically curricula in public schools. And you have a state like Florida that just recently passed a bill called Parental Rights in Education Act, which has been referred to as the Don't Say Gay Act. And according to this law, public schools in Florida, the teachers are not allowed to teach anything about sexuality or sexual orientation the third grade, which is understood as not teaching anything about gay and lesbianism and LGBTQ interests in general. And immediately, a very well-known progressive law firm slapped Florida with a lawsuit. And they reached for other constitutional rights like free speech of the teachers and other things, but it's very clear that they're also working with the framework of parental rights. And so I'm just curious to know if the picture is a little complicated as such a partisan issue as you're presenting it, Neil.
Thank you for two really good comments and some questions. Who would like to start?
Maybe we should just start with the last one, Neil. Do you to kick in, kind of chime in on that one?
Okay, yeah. Yes. So basically, we're just at the very initial stages of research, and so I realize that it may have been presented, that it may have come across as a partisan issue, but this is mainly because at this stage we're only looking at what the anti-genders are doing, and are they active in the space, and if so, how. So we haven't looked at any other actors at all yet. So whether progressive actors are using the same frames of parental rights or not, right now that's a big open question mark. And,
Elaine?
The speaker from Brazil, I didn't catch your name, a lot of really fabulous points about immaturity of children, which apply across cultures, but apply within a given culture to different 12-year-old girls. You know, some are more mature than others. The convention tries to take that on board. It was certainly the drafters were alert to the variable maturity of children and expectations, talks in terms of children's evolving capacity, determining what they can decide about, their parents can decide about, what the state can decide about. Article 12, huge in terms of children must be given a voice, and we must all adapt the systems to make that happen. So on a theoretical level, it's all kind of there. On a practical level, I think you highlighted very real problems in the system. Do we take account of the maturity of the child in determining the extent to which they need protection, what they need protected from, what extent are they involved in the decision making? It's not much of an answer to say it's complicated, but it undoubtedly is.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add a couple of points. I think that what we see empirically, at least in countries, in the high-income countries, to put that term in, is that the children get increasingly more kind of right to be informed and to have more say in their case. So I can see that just recently in the Norwegian changes of legislation, and I can also see that in other countries. But of course, it is immensely difficult when it comes to the nitty-gritty of the decision making to decide when are the child mature enough and what is the competency of the child given its background and its kind of history, and et cetera, et cetera. So, and then I think also to Salman's point is, yes, absolutely. I think that we do see this on the right-hand side as well, and that these arguments are not necessarily put on the right-hand side. It is also a huge kind of debate on the other side, in which they also are using children and they want to have their privacy and their autonomy as parents. Yeah. So thank you for that. Great.
Okay, so thank you. Unfortunately, our time is up, and I think you're all really hungry now. So yeah, it's lunchtime. So I wanted to thank you all for participating in this roundtable. Thank you, Marit. Thank you, Elaine. Thank you, Neil. Thank you for letting moderate this event. And I think Siri has some mugs for us. And then, yes, we will break for lunch for about an hour. And we will be in that room where we will be served some nice food. And then we will be back at 2:30.